The Black Cat's Warning. They say that animals can sense things we cannot. Things that lurk in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. What if a simple creature, like a black cat, was trying to warn you? Would you listen, or would you dismiss it as nothing more than superstition? This is the story of a man who ignored the warning of a black cat and paid the price for his disbelief. David had just moved into a new apartment. It was an old building, situated at the edge of town, quiet and tucked away from the hustle and bustle. After a rough breakup and a series of life changes, he felt like a change of scenery was exactly what he needed. The apartment was cheap, spacious, and perfect for someone looking to start fresh. The building had an old charm to it, with creaky wooden floors, high ceilings, and tall windows that let in just enough sunlight to brighten up the place. The kind of place that seemed to have history, but was also steeped in mystery. David settled in quickly. He unpacked his things, set up his furniture, and spent the first few nights in peace, trying to adjust to his new surroundings. But as the days went by, he began to notice something strange. It started small. The apartment seemed too quiet. No sounds of traffic, no distant chatter, just silence. And sometimes when he walked into certain rooms, he would catch a chill in the air, even though the heating was on. Then, one evening, as David returned home from work, he saw a black cat sitting on the stoop of the building. It was staring at him with intense eyes, unmoving, like it was waiting for him. He glanced around, but there was no one else in sight. He chalked it up to a stray cat and stepped past it, trying not to pay it much attention. But the cat didn't leave. It followed him into the building and watched him as he entered his apartment. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. It was an unsettling presence, but he shook it off. The cat meowed once, then disappeared into the hallway. David didn't think much of it. He had always been indifferent to superstitions about black cats. They were just animals. But the encounter left him with an uneasy feeling that he couldn't shake. The first warning. That night, David lay in bed, tossing and turning. The room felt unusually cold, the shadows of the walls stretching long across the floor. His mind raced as he thought about his past, his failed relationships, and his uncertain future. And then, from somewhere in the apartment, he heard a faint scratching noise. It was coming from the door to his bedroom. It was a slow, deliberate scratch, like claws dragging across wood. David sat up in bed, his heart racing. He glanced at the door, but there was nothing there. The room was silent again. He stood up, walking toward the door. But as he reached for the handle, the scratching noise came again, louder, more urgent. He flung open the door, expecting to find an intruder or some sort of animal, but there was nothing there. The hallway outside was completely empty. The apartment felt strangely cold, and the silence was oppressive. He glanced toward the window, noticing that the night outside had become unnaturally still, as if the world had paused. That was when he saw it, the black cat. It was sitting in the hallway, staring at him. Its eyes were wide, glowing faintly in the dim light. It was as if the cat was watching him, waiting for him to understand something. David took a step back, his breath quickening. The cat's gaze didn't waver. The hairs on his neck stood up, And for the first time since moving in, he felt something close to fear. "You need to leave," the cat seemed to be saying, with its unwavering stare. But David shook his head, pushing the feeling aside. It was just a cat. He had been under stress lately. It was nothing. But he couldn't shake the feeling that the cat was trying to warn him about something. The second warning. The next few days were a blur of tension. David went about his work routine, but he couldn't stop thinking about the cat. He kept seeing it, sitting outside his door, lurking in the hallway, appearing in the corner of his eye when he turned. It always seemed to be waiting, staring at him with those intense eyes, as if it knew something he didn't. One evening, after returning home late from work, David noticed the cat again. This time, it was sitting in the corner of his living room, watching him from the shadows. He froze. This wasn't just some stray cat. There was something unnatural about it, something that made his blood run cold. "What do you want?" David asked, his voice hoarse. The cat didn't move. It just stared, its eyes glowing softly in the dim light. Then, without warning, it let out a low, guttural growl, its fur standing on end. The hairs on the back of David's neck bristled. Suddenly, a sharp crash came from the kitchen. David whipped around, heart pounding. The lights flickered once, then went out. The apartment was now completely dark, save for the dim light from the cat's eyes. "Leave," the cat whispered, its voice barely audible. David felt his legs tremble beneath him. He stumbled toward the kitchen, but there was nothing there. No broken glass, no reason for the crash. The kitchen was eerily still. He looked back at the cat. This time, it was gone. The disappearance. The following days grew even stranger. The knocking sounds returned, but this time, they weren't confined to the walls. They came from the floors, from the ceilings, from all around him. They were louder now, as if the house itself were alive. David barely slept. He couldn't escape the feeling that something was closing in on him, following him through the halls, watching him when he wasn't looking. He tried to ignore it, but the weight of the house, the oppressive silence, was unbearable. Then, one night, as he lay in bed, he heard something that made his blood run cold. Whispers, soft, indistinct, coming from the hallway outside his bedroom. He stood up, his legs shaking, and crept toward the door. The whispers grew louder as he approached. "It's coming." The voice was faint, but it was unmistakable. It was the cat's voice. "The curse is real." The voice echoed in his mind. Suddenly, there was a loud bang from the living room, followed by the unmistakable sound of scratching, like claws on wood. David rushed out of his room, his heart pounding. There, in the middle of the living room, was the black cat. Its eyes glowed bright. Its fur bristled and it was hissing, low and menacing. "Leave!" The cat hissed again, its voice clearer now. A warning, a command. And just like that, the cat was gone, vanished, no trace. The curse, unleashed. That night, David sat in his living room, his mind racing. He knew now that something was terribly wrong. He had to leave the apartment, but every time he reached for his coat, the scratching noise would return. Louder this time, closer. He stood up, his pulse racing, and walked to the door. But when he reached for the handle, the lights flickered out. The apartment was plunged into darkness. And then, it happened. A cold presence filled the room, like the very air around him was alive and breathing. David's breath hitched in his throat, as a figure began to emerge from the shadows. It was tall, shrouded in darkness, with glowing eyes that burned into him. "You should have listened," the figure whispered, its voice cold and distant. David's legs buckled beneath him. He couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. The black cat's voice echoed once more, clearer now. "The curse is yours." David felt his vision blur, his body becoming cold as ice. The cat's warning wasn't just a warning, it was a curse. And now, it was too late. The next morning, the apartment was silent. The lights worked again, the scratching sounds had stopped, and the black cat was nowhere to be found. But when David looked into the mirror, he saw something that made his heart stop. A figure, standing behind him in the reflection, its glowing eyes fixed on him. The curse had claimed him, and now there was no escape. Sometimes, the things we ignore are the things that haunt us the most, and some warnings, when ignored, are curses that never end. Like, share, and subscribe if you dare, to hear more warnings that should never be ignored.